presenting here today. The changing state of the climate has most certainly impacted on temperatures in Trinidad and Tobago. And changes in temperatures has inevitably caused changes in our rainfall patterns. And this has resulted in lower than average rainfall amounts, which has led to drought-like conditions in the 2024 dry season months. Ladies and gentlemen, this also, the higher temperatures, can lead to more frequent storms in the wet season. And this can result in flooding, in landslides, destroying homes and agricultural livestock, impacts on communities, and will cost millions of dollars in damages. As we delve into the sessions this morning, let us remember that the ultimate goal of our discussions is to enhance the resilience of our nation. We must work towards a future where our communities are better prepared for the impacts of climate change, where our economic activities are sustainable, and where our natural resources are protected for generations to come. Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service is undergoing an active period in our techno-structural transformation process. With support from our Minister, the Honorable Marvin Gonzalez, whom I like to refer to as the champion of meteorology in Trinidad and Tobago, and indeed the Ministry of Public Utilities. Cabinet, ladies and gentlemen, has approved the restructuring of the entire organization, which we refer to as the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service. We're actively pursuing the repair of our Doppler weather radar. We have procured and we will install, before the active hurricane season commences, a new GO-60 satellite receiving ground station. In the upcoming months, we'll witness the commencement of the construction of the new Meteorological Services headquarters buildings. And if you have 1 hour, I can outline all the other things that we are going to do. But I'll condense, right? And many other initiatives. All of these initiatives have been spearheaded by our Honorable Minister and indeed our Permanent Secretary and the Ministry of Public Utilities. And I'd like to offer an apology on their behalf. They all engaged this morning and asked me to convey their best regards and to wish everyone a successful forum. Ladies and gentlemen, all of these initiatives, they're targeted at enhancing the ability of the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service to better observe and forecast the weather, and thereby increasing our readiness to issue timely early warnings for all meteorological hazards. Ladies and gentlemen, these, amongst others, are some of the things and issues which will influence our deliberations today. During the forthcoming sessions, you'll have an opportunity to discuss these and many other issues. I'm confident that we, individually and collectively, will come away with valuable lessons from our sessions here this morning. I hope our deliberations and discussions will be both productive and enjoyable. I thank you for accepting our invitation and being present here this morning, and ask for Almighty God to guide all our deliberations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lee, for setting the tone for this morning's proceedings. At this time, I would like to invite Major General Retired Ronnie Smith, Chief Executive Officer of the ODPM, to bring opening remarks.
I have a support in the crowd. Thanks, David. Thank you very much, Camille. And similar to Mr. Derek, I will acknowledge some issues that have already been established. Good morning, all. Good morning, all. It's a beautiful day today, isn't it? Allow me to express my heartfelt thanks to the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service, the director and his team, for their kind invitation for me to attend today's Climate Outlook Forum and to offer a few brief remarks. I was told it was to be brief. Allow me also to congratulate the PTMS for hosting this forum for yet another year, the 16th forum. Very well done. This certainly is a forum that disaster managers like myself look forward to with great enthusiasm because it helps us better focus our preparations for the upcoming wet and hurricane seasons. Today I am here representing two institutions. The first, National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Multi-Sectoral Committee, and I see a number of the committee members here, and of course the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management. As the chair of the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Multi-Sectoral Committee, I wish to thank Director Baig and his team for agreeing once again to host this forum as an event under the umbrella of the National Disaster Prevention and Preparedness Month. We have selected this month, the month of May, to intensify our disaster risk reduction and management activities, DRRM, as it is the month before the start of the hurricane season. And usually, the month we can expect the declaration of the commencement of the wet season. I intentionally use the words intensify. For while during the year, the committee is working on various projects, it is the month of May that we increase our tempo and seek to get more individuals, families, groups, businesses, organizations, and institutions better prepared for the upcoming seasons. The period traditionally when Trinidad and Tobago has greatest losses and damage from disasters. Running concurrently with this forum today are first a business continuity training program for small and medium enterprises, a workshop on psychological first aid to prepare first responders for the challenges that they would meet. And as well, all happening today, a mass casualty training event in preparation for the season, but also for the ICC T20 Cricket World Cup. While in the main, these events are focused on preparing for immediate potential hazards that our country may face, the committee also has its eyes on the slow onset, long-term events such as climate change. Consequently, at present, we are working on two major projects that would have immense long-term benefits for our society. The first of these is an update of the draft Integrated National Adaptation Plan, which is a product of the Ministry of Planning and Development, represented by the Multilateral Environmental Agreements Unit. Also collaborating with us on this project is the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction. And all together, we are determined to ensure that disaster risks are fully considered in the National Integrated Adaptation Plan. The second initiative that we are working on, also in collaboration with the Ministry of Planning, is an integrated disaster and climate risk study. That study, never done before in Trinidad and Tobago, will give us a long-term view of some of the challenges that we are facing at present and those to come. Time does not allow me to go into details about these initiatives. As Director Beck, I'll be about an hour if I go into it, but I won't do it. But these just provide a snapshot of the many things that are happening in the community collaboratively towards developing a resilient and sustainable Trinidad and Tobago. We recognize that understanding climate change and disaster risk reduction dynamics, forecasting trends, and implementing effective strategies are essential steps to safeguarding our nation and region for future generations, while ensuring that hazard events exacerbated by climate change impacts do not overwhelm our country. As we embark on this journey together, let us approach our deliberations today with openness, curiosity, and a shared commitment to action. Together, we have the power to shape a more resilient and sustainable society. I thank you for the courtesy of your attention.
Thank you, Major General Ttmet, for your opening remarks. At this time, I would like to invite you and Mr. Bate to be seated on table 3. And I would like to invite Mr. Benjamin and Mr. Wallace to be seated at the head table. Now, before we look at what is likely to happen in the upcoming season, it's important that we take a look at what has happened so far for the dry season. And to do a review of the 2024 dry season, I would like to invite Mr. Gary Benjamin, meteorologist at the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service, to do so. Please welcome Mr. Benjamin.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Ncof. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Of course, I always say I have an easy task to present what has already happened. This year was kind of crazy a little bit. So I will try to do my best to give you an indication of what has happened, send to you. Good. By early January, after considering all the indicators, we found that the atmosphere had already dried out and went into what we call dry season conditions. So by January 10th, we declared the dry season after ticking all the boxes. And the events of this dry season consisted mainly of frontal systems passing to the north, and their associated shear lines, which sometimes drifted as far south as Trinidad and Tobago. We had a regular low-level convergence, moisture advection across the equatorial Atlantic, the usual hazardous seas, and the hot and dry conditions. Of course, we also had the ever-present Saharan dust episodes with outbreaks of very high concentration. The moisture available for precipitation mainly from the strong surface wind flow generating or whipping up moisture. That is the wind flow around the Bermudas or high pressure cell, whipping up moisture over the warm North Atlantic Ocean. And this would have induced weak perturbations, and together with the passing frontal system, contributed to cloud development and whatever little moisture or whether we have precipitation. Otherwise, mostly sunny, hot and dry conditions prevail. Breezy sometimes, which did little to quell the heat, and we also had our numerous bush and forest fires. Now let us take a look at the January to April rainfall. In preparation for this, we only could have confirmed up to April. So I will give you January to April and then I'll say something about In general, most of Trinidad and Tobago received below normal rainfall from the beginning of December and continuing into the early part of 2024. By the end of January, beginning of February, very dry conditions were entrenched over both islands. Rainfall measured at PRO for January was 60% of the 30-year mean, and for Crown Point, 59%. This trend of low rainfall continued through February, where rainfall totals at PRO was a mere 6.98%, and for Crown Point, 7.027%. While not the driest February, we had very dry conditions indeed for both islands. The low rainfall continued into March. For PRO, rainfall totals measured 41.8% of the 30-year mean. However, the rainfall at Crown Point in March bounced with 215% of the 30-year mean at Crown Point between Saturday 2nd, Sunday the 3rd, and Monday the 4th. This was, we measured 176% of the rainfall for the whole 30-year mean, but this was not indicative of the whole island. This just happened around the south and western area and the Crown Point area, so it was not indicative of the whole island. The island remained dry due to some northeasterly winds coming over the central range, orographic lifting and local ice conditions. So we had that type of rainfall. And while it indicated 215% of the 30-year mean, it was not indicative again of the whole island. Near normal rainfall returned in April with 113.75% PRO and 117.1% for Crown Point. But you must understand that this was dry season figures, so it was still very little rainfall. Okay. That was the rainfall so far for April. Right? May started off very, very dry and hot, both PRO and Crown Point. And up to the 16th, when I first prepared this presentation, we had up to 0.9 millimeters. It was just 0.82, not even 1% yet, of the 30-year normal. And for Crown Point, we just had 3.2% of the 30-year normal. So May started off very, very dry. Anyway, so we started off very, very dry. Again, up to the 16th, that was not yet validated figures. An increase in atmospheric moisture was observed on Friday the 17th with reports of isolated thunderstorm activity over southern and southern offshore areas. Not really on land, but just on the coastal and offshore areas. The daily forecast is good, and also the 5-day outlook side of it predicted the weather. And the quote from the weather update was Saturday the 18th of May. A low level trough affected Trinidad and Tobago, producing cloudy conditions and with scattered showers and isolated thunderstorms accompanied by gusty wind. An extract from the synopsis of the outlook from Friday the 17th for the period May 18 to May 22 advised of the following. The wind in the near surface to mid-level is expected to continue to be steady and moderate for this outlook period. It is possible for this to translate down into the surface at times, given breezy to windy conditions, especially in the vicinity of any shower or in elevated areas. And we did see that. We heard a story about a freak storm. It was not really, let me correct that, it was not a freak storm. It was predicted. We knew the wind was going to be strong, we said so, we predicted it, and also we knew that it was going to be in the areas of showers, heavy showers, and downdrafts. Okay, so we knew about it, and this is what usually happens in the downdrafts or strong thunderstorms. They usually get those winds enough to take off ropes that are not securely or are not strongly secured. And please note that this activity did not signal the start of the wet season and is usually typical for a transition period in Trinidad and Tobago. And the Trinidad and Tobago Met Office would usually declare the wet season either for two reasons or two phenomena. One is a tropical wave which has been trapped from over Africa, which is an African easterly wave, or the intertropical convergence zone. And if we have any type of measurable rainfall from any one of these phenomena, then we would declare the rainy season as having started. It did not happen this Saturday. We had some transition weather, and you can see in the reds just where the major thunderstorms developed for the eastern areas in the Gulf area, and it affected most of the island as it usually does. So after the 19th of May, which I recalculated for this date, but I only got up to the 19th of May. Between the 17th and 19th, again not yet validated figures, Piarco recorded approximately in that event 16.8 millimeters. And this when added to the total up to the 16th of 0.9, measured 17.7 millimeters. And with nearly 2/3 of the month already passed, we only collected, even with that rainfall, 16.2%, which is still a significant shortfall of the rainfall that we would have expected from May. So we remained, weather-wise, we had some wet conditions, but we remained climatologically dry. So now we review the temperature for January to April. Typically, Trinidad and Tobago heat season occurs from March to October with the hottest weather, and the most excessive heat occurring during April to May and August to October, which we know as the peaks of the local heat season. Both daytime and night temperatures were warmer than average over both islands, especially for March, and some high max temperatures throughout the month of March were recorded, with most days close to 34 degrees Celsius. So we had some hot times, or just above for Trinidad, and Crown Point would have hovered around 32 degrees for most days of March. 32 and above for Crown Point is hot times because they're maritime and have the ventilation. So if they could get up to that, it means it is a hot day. The temperatures were recorded as follows. For January, we had a maximum of 32.6, with 10 days above 32.3. For February, 33.9, 10 days above 33. March, 35.2, that's the maximums I'm quoting, with 9 days in March, which were above 34.1 degrees Celsius. April, 34.7, higher days above 34.1 or even higher. Piarco for May, so far up to the 16th, recorded 35.1 degrees Celsius, and that was on the 13th. And listen to this, 35.6 on the 16th. And that is as far as I could have gone with the confirmed figures in preparation. So, heat and dryness. And for Crown Point getting up to 32.4 in January, 32.7 in February, 32.9 in March, and 33 in April. And so far for Crown Point, up to the 16th recorded 33.2. That is May. with most days close to 32.5, rounded off that would be 33 degrees. So I'm painting a picture of dryness and heat for this dry season. Let's look at the hazardous seas events. Impactful northerly swells and strong winds would have agitated the seas and the sea surface, causing hazardous seas, a number of hazardous seas events, and alerts were issued. I just run it through because I don't want to take all the details. I think we will put that on the site. I don't want to go through all the details, but January 24 to 28, we had hazardous seas leading to large waves and potentially dangerous seas. February 9 to the 15th, initially caused by an area of low pressure to the north and northeast. And when these things happen to the north and northeast during the winter time, they would generate these swells towards our area. With a strong mid-level easterly winds across the equatorial Atlantic, we had northerly long period swells affected the northern and northeastern coastlines of Trinidad and Tobago. February 16th to the 19th, we continuing northerly long period swells. March the 11th to 15th, March the 30th to April the 1st, and again April the 4th to the 7th, again due to long period swells coinciding with spring tides at that time, as well as a surge in the low level winds. So when we have these strong winds, as we usually have during our dry season, we would expect the usual number of hazardous seas events, and this was typical for our dry season. Bush and forest fires. I must apologize. I tried my best, but due to circumstances beyond our control, I was not able to get the exact figures or responses from the fire prevention officers. But bush and forest fires caused smoke haze and reduced visibility, causing hazardous driving conditions and lowered the air quality together with the Saharan dust to unhealthy levels. And of course, I know, without having the figures, I don't want to give you the figures, the fire service would have collected that, but I know there were numerous responses to fires across Trinidad and Tobago, and also I observed myself passing through some of them, and it was very hazardous by my own observation to go through that smoke, reducing visibility across the highway to almost zero. It is to be noted that as we transition during the month of May from the dry season into the wet season, the probability of bush and forest fires, together with the possibility of landfill fires and other types of fires, the possibility and probability remains. These are likely to continue to contribute to the reduction in air quality at times, and sensitive persons are still advised to take the necessary precautions when the conditions so dictates. Now let's look at the Saharan dust, the ever-present Saharan dust. Saharan dust outbreaks began in January, 10 days recorded, a bit earlier than usual, and there were high concentrations in the last few days, January the 29th, to the highest concentrations January 31st to February 2nd, reducing visibility down to 3.5, between 3.5 and 5 kilometers. And that's a low visibility reduction, because when we have visibility reductions like that, especially in the aerodrome, then it would curtail certain type of flights, as the air traffic control people would understand, and it will also pose a hazard to driving, because if you want to drive on the highway as if you are a surface aircraft, you wouldn't have time to stop in those low visibilities. At some point, the visibility went down between 6 and 9 kilometers at times. February, 29 days. How much days February had? 29 days. So 29 days of dust days recorded, and with significant Saharan dust concentrations at the beginning of February and continuing through the middle. So most of February had that hazardous Saharan dust. March 14 days recorded, and although the number of days will reduce, however, briefly from February to March, but as we then came to April, we saw an increasing trend in the number of dust days, and advisories on significant concentration of Saharan dust continued from April into May. Another strong episode of high concentrations of Saharan dust in the atmosphere over Trinidad and Tobago began, and that was recently, so you would remember it, from the 4th of May. And concentrations of that Saharan dust at times reduced visibility between around 4 to 5 kilometers. Moderate to high concentrations continued until the 12th of May, and from the 13th to all of a couple of weeks ago, and the past weekend, the dust remained present, wavering between moderate to high concentrations. So after this heavy outbreak of Saharan dust, it remained with us, and mostly moderate concentrations, sometimes mild. And of course, the sensitive persons were always advised to take the necessary precautions throughout these events. Over the years, the Met Office has been closely tracking episodes of dust plumes outflow from the Saharan desert in order to provide reliable background information and forecasts, which would help citizens, government agencies, and all stakeholders to make informed decisions regarding air quality and health and safety measures. During the last decade, special attention has been given to reporting Saharan dust days, which has led to many conversations and also a surge of interest in the Saharan dust plumes visiting Trinidad and Tobago. Sand and dust storms are common meteorological factors or phenomena in the world's desert regions. And because of the hot air, the intensely hot air destabilizes the surface, and through a number of mechanisms presents the dust or launches it into the atmosphere. And it takes that train, the Saharan area, to our areas in the Caribbean. And vast amounts of dust come across to us. Some of the aerosols traveling through the lower layer of the atmosphere is about 40% of all the particles in the atmosphere from wind, from dust, from wind erosion. WMO sand and dust storm warning systems issue sandstorm and dust storm warnings throughout regional centers, one of which is the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology based in Barbados. And Barbados hosts the longest continuous observation of Saharan dust in the Western Hemisphere at Raleigh Point. So we are well aware of the Saharan dust that is coming across, and the conversations are increasing about it, which is good. So we as a nation are becoming more and more aware of it, and we should become more and more aware of it. As we have people, even normal people, who present with ailments whenever we have. Notice that from the dry season, I think I have time with the Saharan dust, because that is one of the major things about dry season. Notice from the dry season months, there's a gradual increase in the frequency and a steep fall off by August on average. You look at 3 months periods, which we forecast for, and the peak of the season is quite evident. But what is noticeable is that no period for the year averages less or gets less than 9 days of dust, with the majority of periods getting upwards of 20 days. And we are now entering the peak of the local dust season, where the number of dust days on average between May and July is up to 44 dust days, as you can see here. The MJJ is May, June, July. And we have AMJ, which is April, May, June. So that is the peak of the dust season. And for more than during the 3 months, May, June, and July, for more than half of each month, we can get citizens being continuously affected by the dust without a choice. From May to June on occasions, it could be nearly the whole month. The Saharan dust has been with us as part of our weather and climate for a very long time. And so, just as precautions are to be taken for other types of weather phenomena, we must do so also for the dust. So get accustomed to it if you can. Get accustomed to preparing for the dust, just like any other weather phenomenon. Don't let it catch you out. The little finish, when you find that boring, so I looked at the IPCC position relative to the Saharan dust on the 9th. But I personally was wondering, why isn't the IPCC presenting itself, at least threatening at that time? And I put them together and we see the outbreak of the Saharan dust for me, which I talked about. It was as if it was holding the IPCC at bay. You see an exact line just out of Trinidad with the dust, and you see the moisture just out of that. So it appeared to be so. So I just put that in to show you the strength of the dust, fighting and jockeying for position for the moisture over Trinidad and Tobago. And you can see it starkly in contrast to what goes on in our atmosphere. And these also are water vapor snapshots showing at the beginning of the year, over the first 4 months, April, the first 4 snapshots from January to April. And we see the yellows, January, February, March, we still have the yellows. And the last two is snapshots of moisture of water vapor in the atmosphere for May. For the last two, because May was wavering and undulating. May started off really dry, and then we've seen some dry, kind of want to be dry. But most of that moisture is in the upper atmosphere. The darker greens would have been lower atmosphere moisture throughout the atmosphere. So I'm just showing you how the season progressed with dryness and getting a little bit moist as May begins the second period of May. Okay, so coming to conclusion, so don't worry. Hope I'm not boring you, because the information is supposed to be of concern to you, because what happens, you now would have an understanding of how our atmosphere operates and what has happened. And try not to forget it, because next year people will come and say the same questions again. So I'm advising you, remember it, and the information I've told you here today, try and teach others around you so that they will have a greater understanding of what actually happens in our atmosphere. As we know all too well, meteorological hazards will impact our lives and livelihood. And here are a few of the impacts which have affected us during the 2024 dry season. Heat stress, health impacts, that is heat stress, hazardous air quality even for the normally healthy. So that you might think you don't have any ailment and you start breathing because of this dust. Of course, it's dust, it's particles that you breathe in. Vulnerable groups affected, persons with varying degrees of respiratory ailments, and also the elderly and the young children, and of course the pets. You can't forget the pets. People tend to forget the pets sometimes. You see pets knocked out in weather and all kind of things like that. Don't do that, please. Treat the pets with courtesy. Water resource impacts. Reduced river and water courses flow, lowered reservoir levels, and of course we had some water restrictions ongoing. One of them, and just an example, is that the the hose pipeline where you can use hoses. Because we had to, well, at least the water authority had to restrict water use because of the dryness. We also had agricultural impacts, which manifested in heat stress in animals, wilting plants, and reduced rain-fed irrigation. Sorry. Although, in general, although there were punctuations at times by a few brief periods of heavy showers in confined areas, this season has been mainly dry, hot, and dusty. And finally, in closing, at present, the Trinidad and Tobago Met Service, we are seeing the moisture begin to increase, but it didn't take 1 month for the water courses to dry out. So we have to take a little time before the water courses begin to fill up. But we are monitoring both the northward migration of the IT season, and as it encroaches closer and closer to our latitudes, we are monitoring that. And we're also looking for the tropical waves. And we hope by tracking them with any measurable rainfall as our criteria states, that from any of these two phenomena in the near future, the wet season can be declared, and I hope it is soon, because we need a relief from this dry season. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope I didn't bore you, but I very thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Benjamin, for your presentation. At this time, I would like to invite Mr. Ian Wallace, meteorologist at the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service, to deliver the presentation of the 2024 Wet and Hurricane Season Outlook. Please welcome Mr. Wallace.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I hope everyone has learned quite a bit from what Mr. Benjamin talked about for the 2024 wet season. He looked at the recent atmospheric changes during the month of May, so it's an appropriate time to find out what we can expect for both the 2024 wet and the hurricane seasons. I will basically start with a summary of the state of the local climate influences, because some of you may not know basically what's behind what's happening over the next few months. So that's what we will start with first of all. So for us in Trinidad and Tobago, we have our three major phenomena that we look at. The three main drivers that we will be focusing on for this wet and hurricane season outlook are the El Nino, which is the Ncof phenomena that we know as El Nino and La Nina. Also, secondly, we're looking at the warmth of the tropical Atlantic Ocean temperatures, which are usually east of us, which can influence the number of systems that we get, as well as our activity during the wet season. And thirdly, we'll be looking at the differences in the oceanic warmth north and south of the equator, which is known as the Atlantic meridional mode. So that's some of the jargon that you may be hearing today, but we'll try and explain it as we go through. Now, first of all, we're looking at the climate driver, which is the Ncof, known as the El Nino Southern Oscillation. You can see that on the screen here. In the Pacific, we tend to find that currently our ocean temperature departures are from the normal. So right now, we have for the past months, the El Nino has influenced the local climate with dry conditions in parts and dry unusual conditions in parts of Trinidad. So we've seen basically right there along the eastern areas of the Pacific. You can see the little blue areas next to South America. Those are some of the cooler waters coming through, and that's showing that we are seeing some signs of the El Nino weakening, and also maybe are transitioning into the neutral conditions by the time we get to June. So these anomalies, which are in the central and eastern tropical ocean, are negative currently, and that will continue at least as we go through the next few months. Now, as the El Nino transitions, the La Nina may develop in June or August 2024. There's a 49% chance of that occurring, or by July, September, with a higher 69% chance. So the La Nina will likely affect our local conditions in the coming months. And with regards to La Nina, it has been found that in the Southern Caribbean, and including Trinidad and Tobago, it exhibits wetter than normal late season and a dry season. So our wet season later on could likely be wetter than normal, but we could also, once you get into a dry season next year, we could be seeing wetter than normal conditions. But we're jumping ahead so far, but we'll look basically right now at what is our second influencer. The second influencer is the sea surface temperatures in the area of interest in Trinidad and Tobago. So that is the waters to the east of the Eastern Caribbean, all the way to the west coast of Northern Africa. And this is a key factor because once we have much warmer than average conditions in that area, it will favor the expansion of the rainy season. That means at both ends. That means we will see an earlier onset as well as a later cessation of the season. So currently, our sea surface temperatures in the Atlantic are above average, and this may come into play with the strength of the tropical waves, as well as the fluctuation of the ITCZ northward into the Eastern Caribbean. Now, the third influencer that we've been also looking at is that North Sea sea surface temperature gradient, what we talked about as the Atlantic meridional mode. So this is a key facilitator of the ITCZ. It basically influences our local rainfall during the season, and the AMM is a coupled ocean atmospheric phenomena, and it basically also links to tropical cyclone development in the North Atlantic. Now, a positive phase of the AMM is basically where we see warmer than average northern tropical Atlantic relative to the southern tropical Atlantic, and the opposite is true as well. But what I'm showing you here now is the tropical Atlantic and a snapshot as we go through the coming months. What you will notice is that all through the season, from June to September, the Atlantic meridional mode is positive. Now, what that means is that we'll continue to see quite a bit in terms of the warm conditions that we've seen over the past few months, particularly record warm conditions in the Atlantic Ocean. And when the AMM is in a positive mode, the ITCZ is displaced over our area more frequently and it becomes more volatile. So this is important because the ITCZ provides Trinidad and Tobago with most of the wet season rainfall. Now, according to the seasonal forecast models, the Atlantic meridional mode is likely to be positive for the next 3 months as we go through June, July, and then continuing through August into September 2024. Now, sea surface temperatures will remain above average late August into September. And to remind you that this is the usual peak of the tropical cyclone activity. So we're going to have very warm conditions, above average warm conditions at our sea surface temperatures as we go through the heart of our hurricane season. So looking towards this slide, you can just see here the colors between the Atlantic meridional mode being positive over the next few months. And this is some of the one of the drivers that we've been looking at the forecast for the upcoming Atlantic hurricane season, as well as the upcoming wet season. So what you're looking at here is a picture of the North Atlantic hurricane basin. Now, all international hurricane prediction centers predict this entire basin. And I will show you a couple here. The Colorado State University has a prediction of 23 named storms, 11 hurricanes forming in our basin. They've also included the fact that we will likely see just around 5 major hurricanes. But bearing in mind that for us here in Trinidad and Tobago, we'll be watching all of these systems as they come across the Atlantic basin in the next few months. And another prediction which has come up from the AccuWeather private weather company, they are predicting 20 to 25 named storms with 8 to 12 possible hurricanes. And the tropical storm risk, which is another entity, is forecasting 23 tropical storms and possibly 11 hurricanes and 5 major hurricanes. Now, commonality between all these forecasts is that they're all for above average tropical storm activity in the entire region. Now, again, this is for the entire Atlantic Basin, but for us in Trinidad and Tobago, we need to drill down into where our area of interest lies. So for Trinidad and Tobago, we like to get down to the models and the analyses on a smaller scale. And for only then can we see the tropical cyclones that will form in our area, and they will tend to be a threat to us over the next few months. Notice the white box here signifies where we will focus our attention on. It's basically on a latitude south of the Cabo Verde Islands, down towards around 7 degrees north, and it extends from around 20 degrees west, longitude all the way across to around 65. So that's where we'll be focusing our attention on for the next few months. Now, on average, we get 4 named storms forming in the area of interest, Trinidad and Tobago, and usually only one becomes a hurricane in the area. Now, bear in mind that last year we did see quite a bit of activity in that area, as 2023 was quite active, and that activity will likely continue as we go through 2024. So looking then, our 2024 prediction basically shows that we'll be seeing above average activity. There's a high probability for above number of storms and hurricanes for 2024. The probability for above normal activity is at 58%. Probability for normal activity is 32%, and probability for below normal activity is only 10%. You can see here we're definitely favoring the enhanced activity that we saw from 2023, and that will likely continue into 2024. Now, in terms of the numbers, the 2024 prediction, it favors 6 tropical storms as the most likely number of storms to form in our area. The average is usually 4. However, there will be a likely range of 3 to 8 tropical storms forming in the area, and of these, likely to see 3 hurricanes forming in the area of interest to Trinidad and Tobago. But it is possible that we could see maybe up to 4 of these becoming hurricanes. Again, these are ranges that we'll be looking at over the next few months. So the region faces another active hurricane season in the area of interest. Heightened tropical storm activity is likely during the peak of the season from August to October, but most likely in August and September, which is where we tend to find most of our activity occurring. Now, any tropical cyclones which are forming in the area of interest have the potential to threaten Trinidad and Tobago and the rest of the Eastern Caribbean, and a season only needs 1 tropical storm or hurricane to cause devastation in Trinidad and Tobago, Grenada, or any other island. So, as we face this active season, Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service urges all agencies to escalate their hurricane season preparations. So, as you can see here, these are the numbers that we're looking at. But in terms of the key points, we've just outlined that the activity that we will see this year will likely be in line with what we've seen in 2023. And this is vital because even for systems that are passing near to Trinidad and Tobago, which may not necessarily have a direct impact or a direct landfall, the influence of these systems can still be felt through the idea of feeder bands that can come from these systems as well. So the likelihood of us seeing heavy rainfall from systems passing or even direct effects of a tropical storm winds and conditions is there. So again, it only takes one of these systems to make it a bad season. So we've looked at the hurricane season for 2024. So now we're going to look at the 2024 wet season. Now, generally, we've been seeing the very hot conditions in the globe from 2023, and that has continued through 2024. So this is going to have an impact on what we're expecting in terms of our wet season. Starting with the temperatures, because of that continual factor that it will play on our forecasts. So generally, the wet season temperatures are warmer than the dry season temperatures, which may not be good news for those who've been looking through the heat recently. This wet season temperature outlook is favored to be warmer than average across all of Trinidad and Tobago. There's a 40 to 65% chance for maximum day temperatures and minimum night temperatures to be above normal. This excessive heat season usually peaks during August to October, with September being the warmest wet season month. So I'm going to show you here about the excessive heat outlook, and we've pointed out a few of the key areas that you should be looking at. So the chances for elevated maximum temperatures to reach or exceed 34 degrees Celsius during the season, and the chances are highest in the months of late August and early October, and also we could be seeing development of hot spells. Chances for the elevated or these short duration hot spells, which are basically developing over a period, is also heightened. Just for clarification, the definition of a hot spell is 5 consecutive hot days, and a hot day is with a maximum temperature of 34 degrees Celsius or above. But even though we are likely to see those 5 hot day spells, we cannot rule out those 3-day hot surges as well. And you could also see those temperatures again reaching or exceeding 34 degrees Celsius. So we've talked about the temperatures. We're now going to look at the rainfall, because this is one of the key components of our wet season. And the Met Office is predicting wetter than usual start to the wet season, with above average rainfall totals having the best chance of occurring at this time. So in June, the outlook suggests a 42 to 63% chance for above normal rainfall for western areas of Trinidad and Eastern Tobago to be wetter than usual, with other areas near normal. You can see there the intense blue colors, creating those western areas of Tobago down towards the southwest coast, up towards Tobago as well. You can see up towards eastern Tobago, Roxburgh, Speyside, and then the northern range, where we see above normal rainfall totals. So the first half of our wet season, for June to August of 2024 as a whole, is likely to be near normal to above normal. So wetter than usual conditions are expected in western Trinidad and most of Tobago. And notice that those intensive blue colors here are showing you where you're likely to see the above normal conditions, at least for the first half. That includes June to August. Now, usually we would present the second half of our wet season forecast at this time, but what we decided to do this year is to break it up into 3-month rolling periods. This will give you a better evolution of how the wet season, show you how the wet season will better evolve as we go through the next few months. So the 3-month period, which is June to August, we said is likely to get near normal to above rainfall totals, and lesser so for August to October, with September to November figured to be as wet as usual. So the months of June, August, and November are likely to be the wettest months of the 2024 wet season. And you notice that those are, again, the blue colors. They do tend to get smaller in area as we get towards September to November. But just bearing in mind that near normal rainfall for November is where we tend to see our secondary peak in rainfall. So November, we often see flooding, even though it's near normal. The accumulation of water that we'll be seeing from August going through into October and into November could heighten the risk of flooding here. So now we're looking at the entire wet season rainfall. So you notice that it's going to be as wet as usual, but there will be large pockets of wetter than usual conditions in the north and the southern coastal areas of Trinidad. So this is something to bear in mind, simply because of, even though we are expecting that near normal to above normal only in pockets, the likelihood of flooding still remains heightened. Now, in terms of the long-term average, you may be asking how much of the wet season rainfall that we're expecting this year compares to the long-term, what we normally see. So when we consider near normal, we look at between 75 to 125% of the long-term average. And we look in terms of our expected rainfall, this compares with the average that favors the highest of average totals to range between 91 to 136%. So again, we are keeping within that near normal threshold for the most part, but again does not rule out the fact that we've seen some of these heavier pockets of rainfall. So for the water, drainage, agriculture, and other sectors, this next slide is of importance to you. We're talking about the total volumes of rainfall that are expected. Now, it is likely that the rainfall volumes will range between about 1,000 millimeters in the leeward side of Tobago and the areas along the southwest coast of Trinidad. And it will be closer to 2,560 millimeters in northeast Trinidad and in the vicinity of North Orocrouche, Sandy Grande, the Orocrouche, Ttmet, and environs. Also in the Tobago, areas such as Mount St. George and Goodwood can expect close to 2,000 millimeters of rainfall. So again, we notice that for those within the construction sector, etc., for drainage, agriculture, and water authorities, these totals do represent rainfall amounts that we are likely to see, but there will be occasional areas in which maybe is slightly higher than what we have. But that is exactly what, for the most part, we'll be seeing for the wet season. Now, one of the major issues for the wet season is that we can generate flooding, and one of the factors that we look at Ncof are the monthly and the daily rainfall that can exceed certain threshold values, which can increase the flooding as well as the hazardous impacts. Now, two of the fixed threshold indicators that we believe are important, particularly to disaster and emergency decision making here in Trinidad and Tobago, is the monthly rainfall that exceeds 250 millimeters across large areas, and excessive daily rainfall in the form of 24-hour rainfall that exceeds 25 millimeters. Also, two other duration indicators that we use are the 3-day and the 5-day wet spells, which historically have been the cause of most of the high impact flood events in recent years. So we have assessed those indicators, and looking at what is likely to happen, the probability of exceeding 250 millimeters of rainfall during the month of June 2024 between 13 to 93% of reaching or exceeding that value, and this is more than the average for the month in most areas. So this outlook shows that Sandy Grande and environs have the highest chance for rainfall to exceed 250 millimeters in June, and this increases the likelihood of flood events in those areas. We also looked at the probabilities for August. You can see here that we have a 10 to 82% chance of a rainfall for exceeding 250 millimeters in the month of August. And again, this is favoring those eastern areas of Trinidad, most part, again around the Sandy Grande and environs. What is significant here is that you notice the location of the reservoirs of Trinidad. We do have the blue covering most of the reservoir areas, so hopefully we should be getting that rainfall impacting and raising those levels as we go through the next few months, particularly through August. We are now going to go through to November, which again is the secondary peak of our wet season, and probabilities here of exceeding 250 millimeters is around 7 to 90% for November's rainfall. So this will again be the highest chances of occurring are in northeast Trinidad, which is also, I suppose, good news for the water managers in the audience. We should be seeing some of that recovery as we go through the next few months. Normally, we tend to look at the excessive rainfall as well, and this is something that, in terms of what intensity we can get during shorter periods. So, a rainfall day, when we get, let's say, 25 millimeters or above, we consider that a heavy rainfall day. And when we get over 50 millimeters, we consider it to be extremely heavy. So there's a 52% chance for above normal number of heavy rainfall days, that is exceeding 25 millimeters. We normally get about 16 of those heavy rainfall days. This year we're forecasting between 11 and 22 of those days. So that's a slightly higher than we have normally. And also there's a 43% chance of above normal extremely heavy rainfall days. That is a rainfall exceeding 50 millimeters within the day. And one factor that we also looked at within the category of above 50 millimeters is the fact of looking at a rainfall of 75 millimeters or above. We are expecting that there could be 2 or 6 extremely heavy rainfall days, of at least 5 likely to produce 75 millimeters of rainfall. We normally only get about 4 of those such days, so it's just 1 day higher at 5, but again, the possibility of these types of rainfall events causing flooding is there, and this is the reason for the inclusion for these outlooks. Now, once we get those heavy rainfall occurring, particularly on a daily scale, we have to now look at how do we spread this over 3 and 5 days, because it's the continuation of rainfall over consecutive days that tends to lead to those prolonged and severe flood events. Now, there's a 53% chance of above normal number of 3 consecutive days with rainfall above 10 millimeters. Normally, we're expecting about 5. We normally get about 4. And during the 2024 wet season, we're likely to have about 49 wet days, which is about 10 millimeters or more, and we normally get about 47. So we will be seeing wet days continuing through this wet season, and again, we're looking at the likelihood of there being a 73% chance for 5 consecutive days of rainfall, where you can see over 10 millimeters or more. One of the major things that we've been looking at over the last few years is the influence of the amount of rainfall that causes flooding. And we've looked at the flood indicators there. We've looked at the 3 and 5 day spells that we could get. We've also looked at the possibilities of us seeing over 50 millimeters or over 75 millimeters. But this will now lead us into what the flood risk is for the 2024 wet season. So the rainfall outlook suggests, for the most part, a wet season that is likely to be wet as usual, with some areas being wetter than usual. It also suggests that the first half of the wet season, particularly June, August, and November, have reasonably good probabilities of rainfall exceeding 250 millimeters, which is more than average in some areas that historically have experienced flooding with such monthly totals. The number of heavy rainfall days are also forecasted to be higher than average. And if I am to basically encapsulate what this wet season will be in terms of 2 words, both the hurricane and wet season, is that we're likely to see a volatile and erratic hurricane season, and also to see a heightened risk of flooding during this wet season. So even though we are looking for near normal conditions, at least towards back end of our wet season, the accumulation of rainfall at the front end of our wet season could be a major factor as we go through the next few months. So this is our flood risk. Again, it exists nationwide, but it will be higher than normal across those well-known floodplain areas, which is of a northwest, as well as the southern areas of Trinidad and the northeast corner of Trinidad, as well as in Tobago. There'll be a moderately higher than normal flood potential in northeast Trinidad, that is near Valencia, Sandy Grande, which includes Vega de Ropuch, Fishing Pond, Sandy Grande, Sandy Cuchito, and environs, northern and northwestern areas of St. Augustine, St. Joseph, Piarco, Port of Spain, and Diego Martin. And similar elevated potentials exist in the South Opuch River Basin, Pinal, Debe, and Moruga. Now, the flood potentials are moderately higher than normal for St. Helena, Caroni and environs, Pomitan and environs, and parts of Manzanilla. And Tobago will experience moderately higher than usual flood potential in the northeastern and southwestern areas, such as Charlottesville, Speyside, Delaford, Mount St. George, Crown Point, and environs. We've taken some time to highlight the flood risk here and those particular areas for the local communities, for the disaster risk managers, for those first responders. Those areas which you have highlighted are not exclusive, but this is where we favor the highest potential for flooding. But as we said, flood risk can exist nationwide, particularly with the enhanced risk of us seeing those heavy bouts of rainfall. So, in closing, we have a few messages here. It's going to be a volatile and erratic 2024 Atlantic hurricane season with an enhanced flood risk during the wet season, and the flood potential is moderately higher than normal for known and emerging flood-prone areas. So we're advising all citizens to accelerate their flood preparations, and disaster managers, disaster preparedness, flood alleviating agencies, and emergency responders. You must be proactive and escalate and ramp up your preparations for the wet season. We have come to the end, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. We will now go into our question and answer segment. So if you have any questions, you can pose your questions at this time. Before you do so, I would like you to introduce yourself and the organization that you represent. Do we have any questions, any comments?
During our Atlantic hurricane season, quite often but this is that for the last few years, we have noticed that our system usually does not without the impacts of the orange bar. Yes, right, okay. Okay, yes, as I was saying, the Atlantic hurricane season obviously is a major concern for Trinidad and Tobago service, in which we find that our systems as they leave the coast of Africa are monitored on the Cape Verde Islands, usually around that latitude or longitude, all the way across to the Atlantic and where we are. The influence of the coronavirus forced us to switch and move these systems around the Atlantic high, but it does not rule out the effects of us having systems coming straight across. We have seen tropical storms affecting Trinidad and Tobago, as well as potential tropical cyclones. A PTC is one in which you have tropical storm conditions are likely that does not have a close circulation. Those systems can bring extremely heavy rainfall. So even though we may see stronger systems doing a slight recurve, that's not something that we should be focused on, because even their general, once you have a tropical cyclone in our area, it will obviously tend to impact us by bringing the ITCZ sometimes into play, and that can also cause prolonged or extreme rain events. So I wouldn't focus on the number of systems that may pass north of us, but the influence of those systems on our local weather and our local wet season. That answers your question.
Yeah, I was just wondering, because last year we had a few systems turning up early or way out in the Atlantic. So I was just wondering what influences that, how likely is that for this period, this upcoming period?
It really depends from time to time on the, I'm saying this to be your original question. It depends on the shape of the Bermuda as well as high, and what is happening even above it and below it. As long as that high pressure spell is well formed, while the cyclones would tend most times to, because cyclones, in a general sense, wants to take the heat from the tropics and carry it into the subtropics. So it would tend to want to go that way. But the blocker on the equatorial side, or the, how the high pressure cell is formed. So once it is there well formed, it would tend to steer what we call the steering current a little more straight. And from it is difficult to tell from day to day how strong that steering current would be in pushing it straight across our area. There's a balance that takes place. The initial behavior, so to speak, is that it wants to go north. That's what they do. They take the heat from our area and pushes it north. The average, while we may have temperatures of 34 degrees, the average temperature across the globe is 18 because of this mechanism taking heat and circulating it towards the pole. So from day to day, from season to season, strength of that high pressure cell would inform the steering current. Therefore, whenever we see the high pressure cell well formed from, and we call it the Bermuda Azores high, from Bermuda to the Azores, well formed, especially on the equatorial side, that is where the steering current will be enough to push it straight. You know that
Thank you. Good morning, all. Kenneth Campbell, representing the Airport Authority of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much for the presentations. I absolutely enjoyed them. Very informative. I have a question relating to lightning strikes. Is there some consideration for the, say, the outlook for or forecast for lightning strikes during the period, as it's a particular concern for us in our operations?
yes, lightning strikes, as long as we have thunderstorms developing, and you would appreciate, I don't know, but everybody should know this, thunder is the sound, to go back and make it simple, is the sound that lightning makes. As long as you have a thunderstorm, you're going to have lightning. And the lightning strikes I think you're talking about is cloud to ground. Okay? So anytime you see a thunderstorm develop, and I know within the aerodrome that is, we call it a Charlie Bravo. So anytime you see that development taking place, you must always be concerned of lightning strikes. And the thing you can do about it is to have instruments that would measure the amount of lightning. I can say for you is to have instrumentation, instruments which would pick up the lightning strikes, and therefore the persons monitoring it would have an idea of how intense the thunderstorm is and operate accordingly. At the Met Service, I know we have been monitoring the lightning strikes from time to time, even in satellite imagery. We could have certain types of satellites which would pick up the amount of lightning occurrences within the cloud. So I suppose to answer yours is instrumentation. Any one thunderstorm from any point in time occurring depends on what is going on in the cloud, the strength of the thunderstorm at a particular time. But the fact is, as long as you see a thunderstorm developing, most likely you're going to have lightning strikes somewhere within the vicinity.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. That's a really interesting question. You did go into detail with respect to the scientific basis for the lightning strikes. But just to add to what he has said, the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service has along the runway and at the approach of the runway an automatic weather observing system. The way in which we have laid it out is that we have equipped these installations with lightning detectors as well as low-level wind shear detectors. I'm saddened though that over the last year plus, these instruments haven't really been functioning at optimum, and this is because they've been lacking service, they've been lacking replacements of key components. But the good news is we've engaged the company that has installed these instruments, Visor, and they will be visiting Trinidad and Tobago. They've been here, they've performed a situational analysis of the installations, and we're going to have those instruments repaired in the coming months. This will better equip the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service to forecast which is really a serious hazard for aviation, particularly for low and light aircrafts that are approaching and will get these winds crossing the runway and can push them off as they attempt to land. So the good news is that we have the instruments, we're getting them updated, but in the interim, the forecasters will alert the Civil Aviation Authority and also the Air Force Authority whenever we expect these hazardous conditions, particularly occurring in the aircraft.
Mic check 1, 2. Sorry, Kenneth Caribbean Meteorological Organization. Mr. Campbell, is it that you're asking the Met Office to provide a particular product that will assist you with your decision making, or based on the responses, that is what you're looking for?
So I think a particular product would help because I was thinking along the line of just as how you would have provided a forecast for other elements or aspects of the weather, something that particularly relates to like a lightning sort of forecast period would help us.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr, for having Mr. Campbell extend his requirements. Mr. Campbell, and for the knowledge of others, the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service is a meteorological watch office, which is an MWO, and it is the only one that provides specialized data for the Caribbean area and, in fact, the PRCO Flight Information Region. And as you well know, and others who are here from the Airports Authority and the Civil Aviation Authority, by being designated an MWO, the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service has responsibility for over 2 million square kilometers of airspace, which is required, which is referred to as the PRCO's FIR. As a result of possessing this responsibility, we issue a message known as a Ttmet, which is a significant meteorological message. And whenever this message is issued, it has impact on aviation and aircraft activity. And one of the parameters that we issue a Ttmet for is severe thunderstorms. So whenever we have severe thunderstorms occurring over the aerodrome or near approach or takeoff that will impact on aviation, the Trinidad and Tobago Met Service will issue one of these Ttmet messages. We endeavor as far as practicably possible to issue these messages, in advance of the activity, during the activity, and when the activity ceases, because we know that these messages impact aviation and flight activity. So as far as formulating a particular message, one already exists. If, however, you'd like the Trinidad and Tobago Met Service to formulate, something that is more palatable, outside of the technical arena for the Airports Authority ground handling staff and crew and so on, we can have some discussion, and of course, that's what we're here for, right? We'd be more than happy to formulate such a customized product for the Airports Authority.
I just wanted to add, and of course I agree with the acting director, and we cover a lot of the information that would speak to lightning and thunderstorms. Besides the Ttmet, we also have terminal aerodrome forecasts, which would give us information of where and what type of weather we will have within the aerodrome. And we also, they call them TAF, terminal aerodrome forecasts. And we also have species, what we call species, whereby we have every hour weather information, we observe weather information. We have species or special information that would show marked difference on what is happening. So if we see a thunderstorm developing or we observe it, we send out what is a species, and the species covers a wide range of different incidents that could happen around the airport. Even an aircraft on final that has to make a go around may be required to say what the weather is like in the aerodrome. So agreeing with the director, yes, we have covered the technical aspects of it in a lot of ways with the Ttmet, the species, and the TAF. But as he said, if there is discussions that could take place, because we have built products for other industries over the years.
Hi, morning. Ncof from OPM Communications. Just a quick question, general, in terms of being able to predict the weather for this upcoming wet season. Ian, I think you mentioned a number of increased rainfall and specific areas. What I want to get at now is, has the climate change situation made it more challenging for the Met Office to come up with these predictions, or have you been able to see some more specificity? Because I've seen you identified Charlottesville, Crown Point, and the particular areas in Tobago and even St. Helena and Caroni in your forecast with respect to the wet season. How has that affected? How has that climate change really affected the ability to predict weather coming forward into 2024?
Well, climate change, as we're all aware, is one of the major factors. It's one of the biggest problems for smaller and developing states such as ourselves. And the ability for us to get into local topography, so-called microclimates, and to be able to look at the use of our numerical model of development over the last few years. The accuracy has increased in terms of sub-seasonal to sub-seasonal forecasting. Seasonal forecasting, where we look at our 3 months and our even towards extended forecasts, which are up to 15 days, 3 weeks, and so on. The ability of the numerical model predictions to fine-tuned into these areas has increased. The Trinidad Meteorological Service uses forecast tools developed through various entities, close collaboration with the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, where we have our kind of prediction consensus, where every month the kind of forecasters from around the region we gather, and we also look at what's happening on a larger scale within the region. We also try to fine-tune that towards the Trinidad and Tobago. Locally, because also there's a reliance on our collaboration with the Water Resources Agency in using their rain gauges and their observed rainfall, which can be used over the last months and years. That also gives you an idea as to where we tend to see the highest rainfall amounts, and therefore that, in conjunction with the weather prediction, we can then tend to more fine-tune our forecasts for those areas. And one of the major, I touched on it briefly, but the topography of those areas is a major factor. Most areas are eastern areas of Trinidad, at northeastern corner, up towards the eastern areas of Tobago. Obviously, wherever we have the hills, obviously tend to get attraction to more rainfall there. The orographic effects of that rainfall tends to favor higher rainfall totals there. But that can only be substantiated with the rain gauges on the ground. And there's an expansion of the automatic weather stations across Trinidad and Tobago. I'm sure the director can speak to that. We're having more stations coming on stream. So that is also going to lend itself to much fine-tuning of those larger numerical weather prediction models and the downscaling that can occur from that.
Hi, morning. Sigurd from 6. I have two questions. So for the first question, see now we have 10 days left in the month of May, and climatologically, the wet season is declared in the month of May. Given the current atmospheric setup, a lack of tropical or easterly waves coming off Africa, and the non-appearance right now of the ITCZ, in your expert opinion, for anyone on the panel at the head table, can we say that the wet season or the local rainy season may actually begin in June, given that it's a first for us in the last 10 years?
Thank you, everybody, for the question. I personally have been seeing an increase in the atmospheric moisture. We are seeing the ITCZ tends to be varying a lot around this transition time. I'm seeing it encroaching in normally forays, so to speak, becoming closer and closer to Trinidad and Tobago's coastline. We also are seeing a tendency for little troughs coming across to be following the ITCZ, but the criteria is the African Easterly Wave. So it is a toss-up as to how soon it's going to be, but within, what it is now, my 21st, I think within the next week or two, we could have some more information as to how close the rainy season is going to be. But right now, it is, what's the word I should look for? It is becoming more and more volatile, so to speak, as far as the development of weather conditions. Yet, we are still to see enough to fill our river levels, but it's quite possible, instead of going around, quite possible within the coming days that we may hear something more about the development of the rainy season, because before I came here, I've been asking questions, and I believe we may be tracking something and trying to figure it out, because sometimes these systems get lost as they come across. Remember, we're tracking East West Africa coastline. Sometimes they get lost. Sometimes you need to just in their skills and looking and seeing something happening there, and then it's just lost. because maybe of the upper level situation, and then it appears again sometimes. So I don't want to preempt what they are doing, seriously don't want to preempt what they are doing, but I think within the next week or two, we could hear something, somebody saying, and it's a toss-up between the ITCZ and African Italy being this year.
My second and final question to you. Earlier you all said that the hot spell alert that we saw a lot of last year, September, October in particular, the definition for that, if I'm correct, is 34 degrees Celsius or more than that for a period of more than 5 days. Yes? So in the dry season 2024, we've had days where the Trinidad Met Service indicated in its outlook that the temperature will run into 34 degrees Celsius, and you all actually recorded that temperature beyond that. Why is it that no hot spell alert was issued in the entire dry season?
To answer your question, it may be that it didn't fill the criteria as yet. It might be that because last year, if you recall, we had some serious hot spell situations, and at times when the citizenry was crying out for the issue of a hot spell alert, and I remember speaking with the climatologist, and it was not reaching the criteria, the stated criteria. We were having like 3 days and a break. I remember we put out a hot spell for a long time, and in between that, we got a deluge of rainfall, which broke it. So, yes, we're going to be having hot times, hot periods, but it may not always translate into 5 days of 34 degrees or more. So, maybe you have a 2 days, we have a 35 degrees. In May, if you have a two days of very hot conditions, you could get a break, so you wouldn't have a hot spell coming out of that. But whether you have a hot spell or not, the understanding should be that on the days when it reaches those temperatures, it's going to be feeling very, very hot for the field light temperature for the persons who has to bear with it on us. So, Sigoni, your question, to answer it again, is that maybe on the few days we had those temperatures above 34 degrees, it did not run into a period of 5 days, but was broken before it reached the 5.
Thank you very much, Signi. I just want to add, for the sake of knowledge, Mr. Benjamin did refer, and he had a scientific criteria by which he defined what a hot day was going to be, and he utilized 34 degrees Celsius as that, upper marker. We looked at the Met Service, we looked at decadal data, and we examined decadal data from 1961 to 1970. And we examined during that period how much days we would have had that would have qualified as a hot day using the criteria outlined, 34 degrees Celsius. And for that decade, we discovered that there were 4 hot days. We continued to examine the data, and we brought temperature data from 2011 to 2020 during that decade, and we utilized the same criteria. Let's see how many hot days we've had in that decade, and we discovered that there were 415 hot days of temperatures reaching 34 degrees Celsius and higher. Now that says something for us here in Trinidad and Tobago. It says that we're experiencing higher temperatures. It says also that Trinidad and Tobago, being part of the global village, we're being affected by climate change. Ms. Martin, for the knowledge of those who are here this morning, and I hope that it will inspire some conversation that we're having later. We also examined temperature data from 1946 until the present day, and we discovered that in Trinidad and Tobago, we're warming at a rate of 0.28 degrees Celsius for every decade from 1946.
Now think about it, right? There have been several decades from 1946 to the present time. It means that our average temperature is increasing by almost 2 degrees Celsius from 1946 to the present day. And this, amazingly enough, is higher than the global average increase in temperature. It has manifested itself in such a way that we are having not only warmer days, but the data reveals that we are having warmer nights. So the average maximum temperature during the night time has also risen. So your question is a great one, and I want to utilize the opportunity to alert not only those of us who are in this room, but the population. Our temperatures are increasing. We have to be prepared for hotter days. We need to implement measures. If heat is stressing us out and we fall ill or we can't tolerate the heat, we need to be hydrated, we need to wear light clothing, we need to stay out of the direct sunlight on very hot days. The general public needs to know we are warming, we're experiencing higher temperatures, and I suggest from a scientific viewpoint that within the next decade, 85 degrees Celsius as a maximum might become the norm. And it will only get higher if climate change continues at the rate.
And why? So I'm aware that the Met Office normally produces various technical. One of them that would have assisted us risk assessment phase. Looking at increasing of tropical cyclone. I was wondering if these reports, if you have any recent updates. This one was published in 2018, I believe.
Thank you very much. The Meteorological Office will from time to time produce these reports, and in these reports we summarize what sort of tropical cyclone activity and impacts we would have had. And that, I think the last, Mr. Kenneth, he's my former chief climatologist, now scientific officer of the Caribbean Meteorological Organization. And I believe it was under his watch that the last report would have been produced. It has been years that we haven't done producing reports. One will definitely be produced. Tropical cyclone season. Of course, we may go to the
Sorry, just to answer the last question first. There is a report from 2021, lodged at the Met Office, so that could be made available. But I don't like, the session is too dead, so this is a National Climate Outlook Forum. Met Office presented an outlook that is supposed to assist the stakeholders with making informed decisions. And so it's a one-way street so far. So I'm going to, with the indulgence of the Met Office, because of my role now, is to ensure that the Met Services is valued and that their information is acted upon so that there is more value to the Met Office. So the question is for the Office of the Prime Minister, for the water resource agencies, what is the message that they will take from the presentations today that they will take back to the Office of the Prime Minister, to the water resource agencies, to Ttmet? I know the ODPM is always with us hand in hand, but to these agencies, including Heritage, what is the message that you all are taking back based on the outlook? Because this outlook is supposed to assist with making informed decisions as we prepare for the wet season.
Good morning, Shambiel, Heritage Petroleum. To answer to your question, the information here is very useful for our operation. And going back to the first presentation, one of the things that probably needed a little more highlighting was the bushfires. This year we saw a lot more bushfires in the dry season than previous years. Heritage Petroleum runs 3 fire stations for operations. And usually every year we will respond to the dry season about 200 to 220 bushfires. This year so far we have had 366 bushfires that we have responded to. So we have seen a major increase in that aspect. So the information from this actually helps us a great deal, especially with the upcoming rainy season where we have a lot of flooding incidents and our operations personnel getting to and from throughout the entire South Trinidad. The information is very useful and accurate and timely information. We actually track Met Services data on a daily basis to know the predictions, and of course we also track the weather and the news as well. There's a question that I would like to ask, and that is in terms of storm surge modeling, because yes, as we saw to increase hurricanes, and in terms of hurricane category 3 and 5, has there been any storm surge modeling in Trinidad and Tobago? We did a small one in Point Fortin many years ago because of our offshore operations, but for the rest of Trinidad, and you can get storm surges in the Gulf of area as well if there's a waterlock on both sides, both mouths. So has there been any storm surge modeling for our coastal areas and to look at the impacts, inundation impacts on coastal inland environments as well as offshore infrastructure?
Thank you very much, Mr. Diallo, for that question. And we're happy that you're present here this morning. And the Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service has worked closely with you in whatever iteration of these called, right? But currently with Heritage. With respect to storm surge, the Caribbean Institute for Meteorology and Hydrology, and they're in Barbados. They are a designated Marine Meteorological Center, MMC. Now, they will normally produce data that will cover the entire Caribbean region. The Trinidad and Tobago Meteorological Service has been expanding a little bit on our marine meteorological services. I've recently had 2 of my officers attend a storm surge forecasting workshop at the CIMH, and they returned, and we are in the process of looking to see how we can take some of this training and data and models that were given to us in the training and implement them here in Trinidad and Tobago. So at present, we have no storm surge data. However, if some tropical cyclone were to encroach on our area, we definitely will include that in what we will call, the information bulletin. And we'd say that, we expect seas of a certain height, and the waves, and in what areas. And I know a lot of your operations is out in what we refer to as the sheltered areas, which becomes agitated whenever we have these tropical systems. So we're developing some products, and maybe in the upcoming months when we expand on our marine services, we may have a specialized product that we will roll out should some tropical cyclone enter into our immediate area of interest.
is Faith and Young. I'm with Tuesday. It was just pertinent if the statement you made where we should expect 35 degrees to be the norm within the next 10 years. With other countries having implementing structures where they have plants and so forth on the buildings to create cooler environments and so forth. My observations between traveling from a remote to Port of Spain is that it gets really hot in places with extreme concrete. And with Port of Spain being that environment, jungle. And is it that the 35 degrees should be expected in the next 10 years with infrastructures like that in place, or is it just as we are right now?
Thank you very much. Quite an interesting question. Now, don't hold me to that 35 degrees Celsius, right? It was just a projection based on what we are observing with the data that we have collected. But obviously the temperatures are rising. The average citizen out there will tell you, and I've spoken to farmers, right? And they've alerted us that, look, guys, we're out in the sun, and the heat that we're experiencing now is quite different to what we would have experienced maybe 10, 15 years ago. And the average citizen will tell you, just being out in the direct sunlight these days, right, that it's a lot hotter than what they would have normally experienced. And so your question is very valid. We have what we refer to at the Met Service and in the scientific arena, we have what is referred to as heat islands. So where infrastructure is taking place, where cities are being built up and where developments are occurring, these are what you refer to as concrete jungles, right? These buildings will absorb heat from the sunlight, which we refer to in the scientific world as insolation, which is a direct heat coming from the sunlight. They will absorb this heat during the day, and at some point in time when the direct sunlight is no longer present and the heat coming from the sun diminishes, the heat is released back into the atmosphere. And obviously, if heat is released back into the atmosphere, and we have a sufficient amount of moisture, these buoyant parcels of air will rise, they'll condense, they'll form clouds, and if the clouds are enough, they'll produce rainfall. And there is a phenomena that we experience more so in Trinidad than in Tobago. It's a localized phenomena that we describe as West Coast convergence. This is where sometimes the prevailing wind from the east breaks down, and we have high temperatures, and we have lots of moisture out in the Gulf of Paria, and we have that what we call, right? We call it, the city effect. All of the heat in the city combined with the moisture that exists out in the Gulf of Paria, they form, cumulonimbus type clouds, which are these thunder showers. And when they develop near Port of Spain or out in the Gulf of Paria, and the prevailing wind from the east diminishes, we get what is known as the sea breeze effect. So these thunder clouds and thunder showers, when they form over the Gulf of Paria, they actually drift inland. And we see them sometimes. I mean, you see these huge clouds forming over the Gulf of Paria. They will produce a lot of rainfall over the city, and they may drift inland. We have experiences of Piaco, right? Observing these clouds coming and producing rainfall as far as Piaco. So the heat will have an effect on rainfall patterns, and the heat will also have an effect on the intensity of the rainfall event. So they're all intertwined.
Good morning to the panel. Good morning to all. Flight Lieutenant Ram Singh, Air Guard Operations. So, sir, I know in the past the Met Office would have been involved in developing a program that tracks tidal movements and current movements in and around Trinidad and Tobago and the coastal areas. Now, this program, once evolved, has a huge potential to improve search and rescue operations for the Coast Guard and of course the Air Guard. Can you provide an update, please, if any at all, as to whether this program is still on the books and how far and how much the Defense Force can help with regards to the development of the same program, please?
I see all my scientists are passing the mic to me, right? Because I wear the hat of scientist sometimes, right? I'm actually the chief scientist, they call me, right? But thank you very much for that question. And we actually have worked closely, right, with the Air Guard and also the Coast Guard with a product that we had developed a number of years ago, which forecasts, wave direction and height. And it was used by the search and rescue efforts of, I think, the Coast Guard to locate someone who had actually gone into the river and drifted as a result of a flooding event. And the data that the Met Office had produced actually assisted in, in identifying where the individual could have drifted based on the present currents in the ocean. The product needs to be further developed, right? And we are also expanding, as I indicated to someone who had asked before, to Mr. Diallo. He had asked about, a model that will highlight storm surges. This product that you're speaking about has to be further developed, and it will form part of a suite of products that will come when we implement our marine meteorological services, which I'm really hopeful will, take flight sometime very soon. Right? Thank you for that question. Right? And we look forward to working closely with you guys. And we're also available, if for whatever reason the products that we're issuing at the present time for marine services is not enough, we work closely, right? And we're neighbors. So you can just give us a call.
Okay, we need to go to a break now. We have refreshments at the back, so I invite you to have some refreshments, and we will resume at 11:40. But before you do that, I would like you to gather at the front so that we can take a group photo. Please welcome Mr. Isaac.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen.
Good morning.
One moment while my presentation is uploaded on the screen. All right, so while it's being loaded, just to give an overview of what the presentation is going to contain. Now that we've given the forecast for the 2024 and hurricane seasons, we pretty much know what to anticipate. Wetter than normal wet season, active hurricane season, a very active hurricane season. Good. Thank you. Right, so just to cover the topics that will be presented today in this presentation, and we'll start off with the potential implications for the upcoming season, and this is again based on forecast information, and then guidelines for the general public, operational readiness for the wet and hurricane season, the ODPM's continued focus on building capacity for climate-related impacts, and not to leave this out, the other potential hazards that we are faced with. All right, so just to speak a little bit on the climate and weather features. So, as we are aware, El Nino is anticipated to weaken, and then La Nina conditions predicted to return by mid-2024. Right, so what does this mean? And it was explained earlier, but I'll just reiterate. So, generally, the Atlantic Hurricane Basin is going to be a little more conducive now for cyclone development, tropical waves, all these different things, these phenomena that affect us, affect our weather, right? And in terms of sea surface temperatures, we know that the temperatures in the Atlantic are pretty warm, anticipated to remain that way with a gradual decrease as the season progresses, right? So, as many of us are aware, extreme ocean temperatures would contribute to hurricane strength. And just to know that 91% of atmospheric heat is absorbed into the oceans, right? So superheated ocean waters will likely contribute to an above average hurricane season, just as the forecast indicated. Right? And also to note, warm air carries more precipitation and humidity. There's an example of some of the climate-related impacts that we could be dealing with as we progress, as the years progress. Right, so the potential implications based on the climate outlook forum. Now, the usual hydrometeorological hazards that we're exposed to: tropical cyclones, high wind events, flooding induced by excessive rainfall, both flash and riverine flooding, short duration hot spells to add to the list as well now. Coastal storm surges, of course, which comes with hurricanes. Just to note that climate change, as we're all aware, is significantly influencing the intensity and frequency of these types of events. Right, so guidelines for the general public as we advance into the wetter hurricane seasons, and these basically are the general guidelines. These lists are not exhaustive, right? Further reading can be sought from the ODPM's Hurricane Preparedness Guidebook, right? Available on our website, right? That goes in depth into hurricane season preparedness for the general public. And now I'll move into, which is related to the previous slide, basically understanding forecast information and something that is so critical for the public. As many of us are aware, the ODPM would have launched the public alert notification system, and which ultimately aims to form part of a multi-hazard early warning system, which is in the works, right? I assume that everyone here in this room is signed up for PANS. So what it does actually is it provides alert notifications on different hazards, so early warning information, tropical cyclones, tsunamis as well, right? So it's aimed for the multi-hazard system, right? And it delivers authoritative updates from the Office of Disaster Preparedness and Management, who would normally coordinate and collaborate with the institutions that are able to provide this information, Met Service, the Seismic Research Center, etc. Also, the Met Service and the Common Alerting Protocol alerts, which are issued to the public via their website and social media, of course, things that the public should be aware of. How do they interpret these alerts, and then the actions that follow as well. Right, so moving on to preparedness for anticipated impacts, and just some general guidelines for disaster risk management stakeholders and the private sector as well. And disaster risk management stakeholders not only speaks to the public sector, but also NGOs and communities and all these various agencies that form the national response mechanism. Right, so essentially, to ensure that businesses and organizations are in a state of readiness, it is essential that they conduct risk assessments, have business continuity plans in place, developed hurricane and flood response plans, or an overall disaster management plan, right? And have an integrated communication plan as well. And something that is essential, which many agencies should have, and the ODPM, before the commencement of the Atlantic hurricane season, would normally dispatch an agency-specific task consideration checklist to various agencies, first responders, to ensure that they have certain necessary measures that are completed or on the way, right? Which ensures a state of readiness to respond for hazard impacts, specifically those associated with the wet and hurricane seasons, right? But it's essential and important as well for these agencies to have internal checklists as well. Make sure that certain areas are covered when it comes to risk reduction. Right, and operational readiness, and as we are aware, climate change can bring increased frequency and intensity of hydrometeorological impacts. So that we're going to see a lot more need for water rescue operations, high water and swift water rescue, search and rescue operations as well. This could be in the urban environment and other environments as well, depending on the particular impact. Also evacuations. It's essential that organizations, local government, ODPM, other state entities have considerations for what exactly would be entitled in evacuations. I know there hasn't been any large-scale evacuations in the country, but yet there is a need to continuously exercise and have plans in place for evacuations, especially for flood incidents, riverine flooding, and coastal storm surges. Right, emergency shelter critical as well. Also having the necessary resources and plans in place for the provision of humanitarian assistance, debris clearance when required, fallen trees, landslides, and also traffic management, which is essential for disruption of major minor transportation routes that the public would need to